Greetings, friends. My name is Peter, and this is Retro Unscripted, Episode 18. I'm glad you could join me today. This episode is going to be pretty unique in this series in that it's going to be a multi-part episode. And the reason for that is because I'm talking about baseball games. Uh, Baseball games make up a significant amount of my retro library, and I really can't cover them all or talk about all of them in one episode without having an extremely long runtime. So I'm going to break this down a little bit between 8-bit and 16-bit games. So the 8-bit games will be in part 1, and then the 16-bit games and maybe a couple beyond will be in part 2. So, you can see my Red Sox jersey. I do live in Western Massachusetts. I have lived in this area for most of my life, so it's just kind of what happens here if you're born and are raised in New England. And a lot of the time, you do just happen to root for local sports teams here. Um, while I am not a wild fanatic about the Red Sox, I do follow them pretty closely because they are the local baseball team. Here in New England, it's generally either Red Sox or Yankees, and that's it. I do follow the sport overall in general from a wider lens. I just enjoy baseball in general. I enjoy home runs. I enjoy power pitchers. I enjoy chess matches between managers when games are tight. Things like that I've learned to appreciate over the years. When I first started playing baseball video games back in the late 1970s, I really wasn't a sports guy. I knew even at that young age that I wasn't really built for athletics. So rather than playing these games outside, I would play them on my grandmother's Atari VCS. So playing games like Home Run or Real Sports Baseball were my first real exposure to the sport, and I really wasn't interested. It wasn't until I had my shot with hardball on the Commodore 64 in the 1980s that my interest began to grow. The game was very easy to pick up and play. It felt like watching TV because of the different camera angles. And to me, it felt like I was playing. I had to make judgment calls about pitches. Am I going to throw a fastball in this situation? Am I going to throw a screwball in this situation? I learned to paint the corners and to apply what I had seen on TV or heard on the radio to a quote-unquote real situation. And that helped me a lot. One of my fondest memories of playing hardball for the 64 is actually I used to keep a notebook full of statistics because the game didn't keep any. There was no save system. I actually wrote out line scores for each game, including home runs, strikeouts, earned run average, all of that stuff. I didn't lose many games, so my statistics were a little bit inflated, but still, the memories of that game and the hundreds of games that I played really opened the door to baseball video games later in my lifetime. Baseball for the NES, which you see behind me on the GXTV, was the first baseball game that I played on the Nintendo Entertainment System. And as it turns out, I actually played Baseball Versus in arcades first. Now, there are distinct differences between Versus and between the home version that you see behind me. Versus, where you see that black box there, actually had a point system that would gradually count down, kind of like hit points in Gauntlet, if you will. If you allowed runs to score or if you allowed extra base hits, the number of points that you had would count down a little bit quicker. You'd be penalized. However, if your team scored runs, if you hit a home run or made a particularly good play, your points would increase. So there's this ebb and flow of point loss, and that would determine how long that your quarter or quarters would last. Obviously, for the home version, that really didn't make a lot of sense because continuing in a baseball game at home was really a tough sell. So they took that out, and baseball for the NES winds up being the very bare bones baseball game that you see. Fielders can't be controlled. You can only control what bases they throw to. Players don't have specific statistics, so everyone pretty much performs the same. And the thing that's really frustrating about baseball is because you can't control the fielders, they sometimes make really dumb plays. Infielders will let balls go between their legs, a la Bill Buckner. Outfielders will completely misplay fly balls, leading to runners reaching base and even extra bases. And that lack of control tends to get frustrating. Some reviewers give this game a really hard time. I tend to give it a pass because it's the first NES baseball game and they did get better. I do play the game from time to time and I'm not ashamed to admit it. Is it a great baseball game? No. But is it a fun baseball game? It depends. I think it's okay. My first big, significant baseball experience on the NES, as I'm sure it was for many of you, was R.B.I. Baseball, this guy right here. This is the licensed version of the game. R.B.I. Baseball remains one of my favorite baseball games of all time. And as a spoiler, you will see this on my top 10 baseball video games list, which will come out on the blog sometime this week. R.B.I. Baseball is just very easy to pick up and play. There are things about the game that don't reflect realism very well, such as how quickly pitchers tire out. Usually starters will tire out by the third or fourth inning, which can be frustrating. But still, it's very easy to swing the bat, to catch the ball, to pitch, to throw to certain bases, and you feel like you have some measure of control in the game that you didn't have in Nintendo's baseball game, which is a pretty big deal. Now, granted, later sequels, such as R.B.I. Baseball 2, cleaned up the graphics somewhat, made them a little bit more lifelike, implemented replays, and did some other things which made it a little more real rather than arcade style, but still kept the arcade style gameplay intact, which is why all three games for the NES, if you can find them, are definitely worth owning. The next series of baseball games for the NES, I think I'm going to be starting a little bit of a controversy here because this is one of those series that people tend to associate with the NES when asked about it. And those are the bases loaded games. Here is the first. There is the second. I want to like these games. I have always wanted to like these games. I played them at friends' houses in the 1990s. I just bought these for the purpose of this video, to play them again and to see whether things have changed through the years. And truth be told, things have not changed. These games still piss me off the same as they did when I first played them. I don't like the fielding at all. I'm not a big fan of the pitching. The hitting is kind of all over the place. It's just, to me, it's a very frustrating experience, and it doesn't improve in the second game. Now, I have not played Bases Loaded 3. It's not in my library. But to me, if I were to rank baseball games on the NES or in general, these games come nowhere near the top 10. I don't like them. If you do and you can give me reasons to keep trying, then feel free to do so in the comments below. I am willing to listen. And I certainly have the games in my collection now, so I'm not about to sell them. But if you can give me reasons why I should really give these games a chance, then I am more than willing to hear them out. But for now, I don't want any part of them. They're going to sit on my shelf, and that's it. Tecmo also made a couple of baseball games for the NES. The first one, which is Tecmo Baseball right here, very aptly named, is kind of bare bones, much like Nintendo's baseball game. There is a little bit more control for the fielders. There are some very basic cutscenes in the game, but it's a weak offering at best. Some of it's funny in that it's so weak, and I might do a Pete Plays episode on this at some point, maybe just before the regular season starts for baseball. But I only paid a couple of dollars for this, and that should be no more than what you pay if you decide to add it to your library. But the second Tecmo baseball game for the NES, yeah. No pun intended, but they hit out of the park with Bad News Baseball. Bad News Baseball is from 1990, and it doesn't have any Major League Baseball players in it. As a matter of fact, it's very kid-oriented. The cutscenes in the game have nothing but kids. It feels like a Little League game, really. But Bad News Baseball executes the R.B.I. Baseball style of gameplay to a T, while also having the trademark Tecmo cutscenes that just add a little bit of character to the game. And at the same time, as you play each team in succession for round robin, the teams do get progressively harder. There are other things to think about in the game, such as player stamina, that you can't really see in an R.B.I. baseball game. Overall, this is one of my favorite baseball games of all time. And you'll see this on the top 10 list as well. So I've given 2 away already. Now, where they will be on the list, I am not about to tell you because then you won't read the blog entry later this week. But it will be on the list. And if you don't have it in your library, I strongly, strongly recommend it. Next up in my library is Baseball Simulator 1000, and this is from Culture Brain. This is one of the NES Baseball games that has a battery backup in it, and is also one of the reasons why I really like the game. Up to playing Baseball Simulator 1000, I had not played a Nintendo baseball game that kept statistics like this one does. And because I'm a numbers guy and I like to see how many home runs, what the what the batting average is, what the ERA is, rather than having made up numbers, this game is perfect for that. It also plays like R.B.I. baseball, very similar. The play control may be just a smidge worse, but that's, I mean, with as good as R.B.I. and Bad News Baseball are, that's really not saying a great deal. It's like taking some of the sprinkles off of a hot fudge sundae. It's imperfect, but still very edible and a lot of fun to eat. This game is slightly imperfect, but still very playable and a lot of fun to play. You'll see this come up again in part 2 of this episode when I talk about 16-bit games, as the Super Nintendo version of this is fantastic. Now, one baseball game that I can't cover in this particular video because I don't have it in my library is Baseball Stars. And I do understand how good Baseball Stars is. I have played it. I have seen multiple YouTube and other reviews of the game. I know it's great. The reason that it's not in my library, quite simply, is because I have not been able to find it anywhere in the wild here when surveying local game stores. When I have found it, the couple of times that I found it, the asking price I found to be a little bit too high. And I was holding out hope that I could find it for a bit cheaper, and unfortunately, leading up to this video, I just couldn't find it at all. But rest assured, when I do find it, if I can find it, I'm going to get it, because it's great. However, I do have Little League Baseball Championship Series from SNK, which, while it doesn't have all of the bells and whistles that Baseball Stars has, such as battery backup for statistics, and a salary system to cut and sign players, the basic gameplay here is very similar to Baseball Stars in the way that it looks, in the way that it plays, in the way that it handles, and that's not a bad thing at all. It's not the best Little League Baseball game, at least not in my opinion. That goes to a modern game, believe it or not. That accolade goes to Activision's Little League World Series Baseball 2010 for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, which, if you have not played it, you owe it to yourself to try it, because it's actually quite good despite the fact that it's meant for kids. The play controls are a throwback to R.B.I. baseball and games from yesteryear. But just staying on topic, this game is also very playable, and if you don't mind the password system and not being able to save statistics, and the fact that it's Little League instead of a more adult situation, this does deserve a look for your collection if you like baseball games at all. And finally, the last game in my 8-bit library for baseball games. And this is going to be another one of those that might cause a bit of controversy, because I tend to think that this game is a little bit overrated. This is Base Wars here from Konami/Ultra. This also is one of those battery backup games. If I was to play a game of video game analogies with you, I would use the example of Cyberball is to football as Base Wars is to baseball. It's the same kind of idea. Instead of people playing, we have robots playing the same exact game with little bits thrown in here and there to make it its own experience. In Cyberball, for example, you can literally kill other robots by tackling them when they are smoking or when they have a critical football and they just blow up. In Base Wars, force outs don't exist, as you can actually get into fights with the fielder and try and win your base by force instead of being forced out. It's a button mashing fest, and there are certain factors that come into play, such as how far from your target base you are. It's certainly an interesting concept, but it doesn't really work for me. I don't think that it's a major step forward, and the fact that there's not a way to take that out is a little bit frustrating. It reminds me of what MLB Slugfest did with kind of taking out some of the realism of the game, and having fights and being able to punch players and such. I understand that it's not supposed to be a real baseball game, but it doesn't really click with me. That doesn't mean that it's a bad game by any stretch. It just means that for my worth, it doesn't quite do it. The game is also flawed in a couple of ways too. Most notably, the fielding system and the camera system following a batted ball. If you play defense in this game, it can get frustrating and pretty quickly, especially if the ball is hit very hard. It gets very difficult to follow where the ball is going, very difficult to position your players properly. And while the game does a pretty decent job of automatically positioning fielders the best it can, if the ball is hit too hard, you have no time to react because the camera doesn't show you where the ball is. So that tends to get a bit frustrating. Also, pitching isn't very deep either, and that's kind of too bad, as the pitcher-batter matchup in any baseball game is really what drives it and what makes it good. So that's me, though. I'm sure a lot of you like Base Wars, and I certainly don't hate it, but I think it gets just a little bit too much love as far as being one of the best baseball games for the NES or in general. So that wraps up part one. As I mentioned, it's going to be a two-part episode, as I don't want to give you guys a video that runs 40 minutes. I'd rather break it up so you guys can get some popcorn or Cracker Jack before coming back and watching part two. In part two, I'll be taking a look at the 16-bit baseball games in my library, and maybe a few 32-bit ones. Let me try that again. 32-bit baseball games, if time allows. But that is part two, and you guys just watched part one, so I hope you enjoyed it. My name is Peter, and I thank you for watching. I will see you on the next Retro Unscripted. Until then, take care.